Hello, and welcome to day 2 of our week of webinars. I'm Mary Ellen Beatty, Director of the Citizen Watchdog program, which is a special project of the Franklin Center. Well, yesterday we heard from the Daily Caller's Matt Lewis about how to break into journalism, and we've got 4 more great speakers lined up for you this week. But right now, we want to shift gears a little bit and talk about divisive politics, specifically in the Obama administration, and the political tactics that divide Americans rather than bring us together. Well, Kate Obenshain wrote a book on this very topic called Divider in Chief, The Fraud of Hope and Change, and we're going to talk about this book today. Kate is a very accomplished woman. She was the chairman of the Virginia Republican Party, where she received national attention speaking against tax increases and also the expanding role of government in America. She served as the vice president of the Young America's Foundation, where she helped develop the nation's leading conservative lecture program for young people. She was also chief of staff for Senator George Allen, and currently she is on the board of directors for the Claire Booth Luce Policy Institute. So a wonderful resume. We're so excited to have her. Kate, welcome to the program.
Thanks for having me. It's great to be here.
Wonderful. Well, I just want to remind everyone before we jump in and get started that today's webinar is live and you're able to submit questions in real time. So you can email me at maryellen.beatty@franklincenterhq.org and we will answer your questions for Kate. Wonderful. Well, we want to go ahead and jump in and get started here. Why don't you tell us a little bit about your book, and let's jump back into the 2008 presidential election. There was a lot of expectations, I think, for Barack Obama as a presidential candidate. He talked a lot about post-partisanship and also rising above petty politics. So tell us, did Barack Obama live up to some of those promises and expectations?
Yeah, that's not too tough of a question. I love it. I'll take that softball. Well, thanks so much for having me here. It's great to be here. It's great to talk to your audience. I'm looking forward to it. I wrote this book because of that ridiculous fraud that this president basically perpetrated on the American people. He was going to be the great uniter. That was really the one reason he was elected president. He said that he was going to heal our wounds, bring us back together. That soaring rhetoric of hope and change that even for those of us who didn't agree with any of his ideas, that it was beautiful. It really was. Remember on Inauguration Day, when the president talked about how he was going to listen to us, especially when we disagree. That was a quote, talking specifically to conservatives. Well, it wasn't 3 days later when Barack Obama was meeting with House Republicans. It was one of 2 meetings that he ever had with House Republicans after saying that he was going to meet with them once a week. And at this meeting, Eric Cantor laid out the Republican conservative position on keeping taxes low, very philosophical, very respectful. And this president looked at him and said, "Eric, I won, you lost, I trump you on that." So that was his idea of listening to us, especially when we disagree. Gone was any facade, any game of healing us, bringing us together. He had talked about the smarminess, the pettiness of name calling, and yet Obama became the name caller in chief, really. He began to talk about conservatives as they were hostage takers, the enemy. They care only about millionaires and billionaires at the expense of children with autism and Down syndrome. It was attack after attack, all intended to vilify the half of the population that disagreed with him. And it's I just saw that the Leadership Institute was playing their Rules for Radicals video, which is excellent, by the way. And this is exactly in line with what Saul Alinsky's philosophy taught Barack Obama when he was a community organizer. He was a very good community organizer. It was the one real skill that Obama brought to the administration. No diplomatic skills, no business experience, but he was a great community organizer. He was known as the master of agitation. That's how good he was. And what he would do would be go into a community, help focus the community's attention on an enemy, some sort of villain. Then he would rile everyone up, getting them just hate-filled, angst-filled toward this corporation or an individual, and then, as they're all hot and furious, he would ram through whatever his agenda was. That is exactly what he's done at the national level. He has focused the American people's attention on anything other than his ideas. He doesn't even have to defend his ideas. If every time conservatives proffer a different ideology, a different plan, he can basically silence them by saying, aha, I told you they hate women, or they hate poor people, or they hate the working class, they hate black people, immigrants, whatever it is. It's his way of ramming through a very radical left agenda, but also avoiding that messiness of debate, that back and forth. And in my book, The Divider in Chief, I'm really clear in the beginning, the introduction, that I am not criticizing division in politics. I am all for the vibrant and vigorous back and forth of ideas. It's the foundation of our country. Our founders weren't sitting around holding hands, singing Kumbaya. They were having this intellectual exchange that was based on a mutual respect for one another. Obama's going right for that mutual respect and saying that any ideas that are different from his come from some flawed morality, comes from a prejudice of some kind, a hatred of some kind, because he does not want to deal with democracy. We've seen that again and again as he's willing to go around our established form of government, go around Congress, go around the court, if it gets in the way of his ideology. But I specifically go through and I talk about all of the various groups that Obama has ripped apart, how he has pitted us against one another in terms of women against men, women against each other, religious versus secular society, the class warfare, pitting different income groups one against another. That has really astonished me, how he's done that. And, you know, conservatives have to be careful that we don't fall into defense. We don't accept that terminology, because in America, we don't pigeonhole people into different income groups. In fact, many Americans came here to escape that sort of classism. We believe that Americans can achieve whatever level of prosperity they dream of, as long as they've got the hard work, the ingenuity, they play by the rules. We can achieve greatness in this country. We're not going to be pigeonholed in the middle class and stay there, as Barack Obama loves to say. But it's incredibly destructive what he has gone about doing systematically, ripping us apart, pitting different groups one against another. My book is a little different in that I don't go through and just talk about all the horrible things that he's done in this administration, although I think that's really important and needs to be done. But I'm looking at a systematic problem that has arisen from this presidency. And a lot of folks say, well, how in the world could Obama still be ahead of Romney? I think that's really not the case anymore. But how has it happened that they're even close? Well, this divide and conquer mentality, this rhetoric, has been incredibly effective. It's scaremongering, and I know we're going to go through and talk about some of the specific groups, particularly with women. It's pure scaremongering. With classism, it is instilling this sense of jealousy and bitterness and hostility, and removing us from that vigorous exchange of ideas that are based on policies, that are based on ideas. That is good and wholesome, but we're getting too far away from that.
Well, first I kind of want to talk about, what did the media first say about Barack Obama as a presidential candidate, and have they done a good job of holding him accountable to some of his campaign promises in 2008?
Right. Well, that's the basic problem in terms of how did he ever become president of the United States with zero experience to back him up. Basically, he was not vetted. None of his associations with total radicals that if people knew who he had been associated with, who some of his role models were, if Jeremiah Wright had been given a public hearing and the Black liberation theology, this man would not be our president. There's no question. The press did not do its job. It is an integral part of our democracy, of informing and educating the American people, and it absolutely went to sleep because it was so enamored with the notion of Barack Obama, in part first black to become president, but also because his ideology is incredibly radical. And unfortunately, the vast majority of the media also have this very radical approach and very radical perspective. Over the past 4 years, I'd say no. They haven't talked about the unappointed czars. They've done no investigation of the regulations that are a part of Obamacare, but also cap and trade. Basically, cap and tax is being implemented through regulations. This administration has done nothing about that. Looking at how much money the Obamas have spent on vacations, on family vacations, we haven't heard anything about that. Thank heavens for good journalists on the right, for the Franklin Center and Leadership Institute and National Journalism Center. So many different groups. I mean, we've got the internet now. We can't really complain too much about the media because we just have to go around the media. But no, they're trying to pave the way for a second term, trying to make sure that the right is not able to infiltrate mainstream media by presenting the real story of Barack Obama.
Now, I know the Washington Examiner last month, I believe, came out with a piece. It was the untold story of President Obama. And it was maybe a 10-page pullout, and it went into full in-depth about his background, his childhood, his time as a law professor in Chicago. And it was the first piece that I had really seen that I thought fully vetted him as a man, his experience level, and just interacting with other people, like you mentioned. And I thought, gosh, this piece should have been written in 2008 because there was a lot in there. And I feel like I'm an informed person, who reads the news quite a bit. And there were some pieces of information in there that I had never heard of in the media. So
right. I mean, it should have been published in the New York Times and the Washington Post, but it will never be. You've got the New York Times that is actively working to suppress any information that will be problematic for Obama. The whole Libya situation in Benghazi, those hearings that were held on Capitol Hill, incredibly important hearings, page A3, in hopes that nobody would pay attention to the fact that there was a massive cover-up by this administration on what really happened in terms of security, what happened. There was no video problem, there were no mobs, but the New York Times was actively complicit in trying to cover that up. And so the Washington Examiner has to go and be the ones to uncover the real story of Barack Obama. But the good thing is that hits the internet and a lot of people become more educated.
Wonderful. Let's talk about this notion of post-partisanship, how he made a commitment, President Obama made a commitment to work with Republican leadership, to meet with them regularly to try to come up with solutions for the American people, to heal our wounds, as I heard you say. Has he been able to work with Republicans sufficiently in the last 4 years?
He hasn't worked with Republicans at all, and he continues to blame Republicans, even though he had a Democrat Congress for the first 2 years of his administration. But it is precisely because Obama was unwilling to work with Republicans in Congress that Congress turned over in 2010, the House of Representatives, because young people and women in particular flocked to Obama in 2008, specifically because he was going to transcend politics as we know it. And he was going to reach across the aisle. He was going to listen to us, especially when we disagree. And when he didn't, and instead did the exact opposite and sought to vilify good, decent Americans who happen to differ in their opinions, then women and young people in particular turned their backs on Obama. We had the first time since the 1970s, I believe, when the Republicans went in favor, and when the women voted in favor of Republicans. And that was specifically because, number one, he wasn't getting anything done except ramming health care down our throats, but he had specifically turned his back on his promise not to engage in that rancor, in the petty partisanship. We saw that instead of being transparent administration, it was actually more secretive than ever, with the hearings on Obamacare being held behind closed doors. There was no C-SPAN, no live coverage as we'd been promised, but instead it was completely the opposite, and it was that nasty rhetoric. It wasn't Obama saying, I disagree with you, and let me tell you why my ideas are better. It was, you all hate poor people. There's always the notion that conservatives were racist when they disagreed with Barack Obama, that they hated immigrants when he called Republicans hostage takers, that they were founding members of the Flat Earth Society when they suggested that we should do some more domestic oil drilling. Again and again, he tried to paint them as idiots, hate-filled, greedy, and it really, at least in 2010, it did not work with the American people.
The media often portrays President Obama as being a champion of the middle class, that he's really looking out for their best interests. Can you talk to me a little bit about that? And has he represented their interests well?
Well, first of all, I hate to play into that incredibly divisive classism rhetoric. And I am shocked that we are currently now talking about the middle class, for one, being the ultimate goal. This is a president who has as his goal the equalization of outcomes. He doesn't believe that anybody should have more, except perhaps himself. I mean, he is incredibly successful and has incredible prosperity. But it is that elite notion, that liberal elite notion, that they know best. They know what is best for us, what is best for the broad sector of the American people. And so he says repeatedly in his speeches, we want to help Americans get to the middle class and stay there. What is that? I mean, how dare he suggest that he knows what should be our aspirations? We in America believe in limitless aspirations. But in doing so, he also is diminishing the whole notion of success. And he does this in particular, he did it with the "you didn't build that," with talking about the greed, the astonishing greed of the few he talks about. But also when he talks to young people, he really does undermine this notion of success and ambition as positive aspirations. He's called it that wanting that success, wanting the successful career, the nice home, it betrays a, quote, poverty of ambition. Now, to me, that is, again, extreme, audacious arrogance to tell young people that they should not aspire to greatness. Because in my opinion, aside from our military and those who are willing to put their lives on the line to protect you and me, our businessmen and women are some of the great heroes of our society. They have been willing to risk everything, to take out that second mortgage, to risk their children's future, prosperity in the future, in order to take a chance on starting a corporation, starting a business, starting a small business, hiring some more people. And yet, by doing so, they don't only help themselves, they help so many others. They provide job opportunities, the hope for prosperity for others. So I'd say in so many ways, Barack Obama has undermined the hopes and aspirations of hardworking Americans, suggesting that it is greedy to want more, suggesting in particular that they cannot succeed on their own. They need the hand of government reaching down. I mean, Obama said in the very beginning, there is no way we can get out of the quandary that our nation faces now without massive infusions of government funds, that the American people just don't have it in them, that their ingenuity and the free market cannot get us through. We know as Americans that actually when the government gets out of the way and allows the ingenuity of the free market to be unleashed, that's when we achieve our greatest prosperity. But this president suggests that no, actually it's the government that comes in. And we of course have seen that nebulous middle class group, if we're going to qualify it, we've seen their economic prospects diminish. We've seen unemployment for that economic income group go up. We've seen, of course, gas prices and food prices, energy prices skyrocket. That hurts those who are struggling and living paycheck to paycheck more than anybody else. So actually, those groups that Obama has claimed to champion, the middle class, young people, women, African Americans, they have suffered disproportionately under this administration.
Now, we hear a lot about the 1% versus the rest of America. I think even in some political ads, you hear, well, the rich just need to give a little bit more money. How has the Occupy movement played into that?
That's funny because the Occupy movement is so irrelevant. They're so tiny, and yet Obama's support of them, his basic encouragement, Nancy Pelosi, the leaders on the left, they're trying to stoke the flame so that it can be sort of the counter to the Tea Party. It will never be, in part because of the stark differences of the origins. Occupy Wall Street is based on a lot of rich, entitled kids, actually, who are skipping college classes, who are out there complaining about corporations. But it's a movement that's based on bitterness. and envy and a sense of entitlement and dependency on the government. We need more and more and more. There was one video of a Occupy Wall Street protester, and he was offered a job by one of these Wall Street executives, came down and offered him a job, and the guy said, "No, I don't want it. I don't want your job." Saying that actually it didn't pay him enough. He wasn't going to make enough money. I mean, what kind of a statement is that? That's saying, you got to give me more. I don't have to go in there and earn it and prove to you that I'll be an excellent employee. And yet you've got the Tea Party movement as a stark contrast. These are hardworking Americans. The last thing they ever thought they'd be doing is standing out on a Saturday holding up a sign, yelling and cheering and singing "God Bless America," but that's what they're doing because they've been pushed too far and because they realize that their liberty and their ability to have a self-directed life and to achieve prosperity is literally on the line with such atrocities as Obamacare that is literally intended to usurp our freedom, take away 1/6 of our economy, take it into the government hands. They see the peril of that, and that is the stark contrast between Occupy Wall Street and the Tea Party movement. And I think the Occupy Wall Street is the embodiment of this notion of Barack Obama, that you can't do it on your own, and you need to be filled with greed and envy and hostility to those who have succeeded.
Now, in your book, you mention that President Obama has a difficulty relating to the middle class, and in some cases, maybe doesn't spend as much time with the middle class as he does other people. You mentioned specifically with Hollywood.
Right.
Can you talk a little bit about Obama's relationship with Hollywood?
Sure. I mean, I'm glad you point out that Obama, who claims to be the great compassionate champion of the middle class, knows nothing about the middle class. And we need to remember he grew up in a very privileged background. He acts as though it was not, but it was. And talking about the price of arugula back in 2008 and how we commoners cling to our guns and our religion. It shows his complete misunderstanding of and saying that the American economy is doing fine right now, while he and Michelle go on these million-dollar trips all around the world. Absolutely, Obama has this love affair going on with Hollywood, and talk about being out of touch with hardworking Americans. There's no understanding from Hollywood of what you and I are trying to deal with and how we're struggling to provide a better future for our children. The morning after the atrocious attacks on our consulate in Benghazi, instead of going to a security briefing, this president decided to jet off to a fundraiser in Las Vegas with Hollywood elites. He was hanging out with Beyonce and others, and that signifies to me, it's symptomatic of this overemphasis on Hollywood. Barbara Streisand made a plea yesterday for Barack Obama needing more money. This president has done more fundraisers than all other past presidents combined, and yet he bemoans the influence of money and fundraisers in politics, and yet he embraces more than anyone else, but in part because it means he gets to hobnob with the elite, with those who think that they know more, that they are better than we are. The fact that he, instead of meeting with Bibi Netanyahu, when he was requested a meeting, he went on The View with his Hollywood gal buddies, and instead of talking about Benghazi or what's going on, what he's going to do to fix the rising tide of terrorist elements in the Middle East, he talked about his early romance with Michelle. I think really, one, betraying the fact that he's so out of touch with what the rest of America is struggling with, but also just this notion that playing into the hands of what the liberal media and Hollywood elite want. They're so enamored with Barack Obama and Michelle. It's sort of like the Kennedys' Camelot again, but on such a superficial level.
So how do special interest groups then play a role in his presidency? Do you think that he has the country's best interests in mind, or maybe only a small few?
Yeah, that's a great point, because this is the president, before he was elected, said that special interests would not play a part in his administration. Lobbyists wouldn't, and then we see something happen like Solyndra. We see the president and his administration, despite repeated warnings that Solyndra was going to fail, we saw them giving $500 million to this failing green energy company. And then we find out that those on the board of Solyndra were some of Obama's biggest campaign contributors. If that's not a special interest, I don't know what is. When it came to Obamacare, who had a hand in crafting that legislation? You and I didn't know anything about it because it was behind closed doors. It was lobbyists that had the influence over that legislation. Even something, and I know that this is sacred ground, but even the Lilly Ledbetter Act, we never discuss the pros and cons of that because, of course, we're sexist if we do. We hate women if we do. But the trial lawyers, yet another special interest group, they benefited significantly from that because the statute of limitations was extended for workplace grievances now, specifically for accusations of sexism. So that was something that the trial lawyers specifically lobbied for at the expense of small businesses. Obviously, Obamacare is devastating to small businesses, but it's something that the special interests want. We see him placating unions again and again with the auto bailouts. It was the shareholders, the hardworking shareholders, and those who held pensions in those companies that suffered, and yet the unions got a buyout, a payout. So again and again, this man who said that special interests would not have a role in his administration, he has shown that he has done the exact opposite.
Now, I want to pause and just for citizens who've been listening to what you're saying and they want to read your book.
Great.
Where can they find your book?
They can go to my website, kateobenshain.com, or go to Amazon, Books A Million, Barnes & Noble. It's everywhere. It's in your bookstores, but if you want to get it really fast, you can go online. It's on Kindle. It's you can listen to it, so it's pretty much everywhere. But I would say if you get my book, thank you very much for doing that. Read it, but then pass it along to somebody who hasn't made up their mind yet, or who might be wobbling, or give it to somebody who's actually planning on going out and supporting Barack Obama, because it is an eye-opener. I like to think of the book as a smack in the face, just in terms of how different this administration has been compared to what was promised. He's not bringing the nation back together. He is ripping us apart. And specifically, give it to a young woman who perhaps has fallen for the war on women. Give it to somebody, a young person, who thinks that soaring rhetoric actually meant something to Barack Obama, and it will point out to them how systematically he has gone after the interests of young people and how completely opposite he is to that great uniter that we all hoped that he would be.
Now, I just want to remind everyone again that you can, if you have questions for Kate right now that you want her to answer in the webinar, feel free to email me at maryellen.beatty@franklincenterhq.org. You can also follow Kate on Twitter. For those of you who are live tweeting right now, it's just at Kate Obenshain.
Right.
So feel free for those of you who are on Twitter today. Now I kind of want to jump back into that notion of young people, right?
Okay.
In 2008 presidential election, again, young people were very involved, more so than they have been in past presidential elections. And I think they were really inspired by Barack Obama. And how has he done in representing the interests of young people?
You know, I hate to think of how he has made our young people so cynical about the political process, but I think that is going to be one of the really sad consequences of this administration, because he specifically targeted young people, and he still does that, true to form, to the Saul Alinsky philosophy of going after young people while they're in their formative years. This president has been on college campuses since his inauguration one time every 11 days. This is the most powerful man in the world. Somehow has found time to go and basically drill his ideas into the heads of young people. Not that they really need it, because they're on college campuses where they get it every day. Anyway, they get the liberal thought police out there not allowing them to have any sort of dynamic interaction with one another, or they'll have to go to sensitivity training. But Obama has gone towards the young people. He has suggested that why can't everybody just be equal? Why can't everybody just have the same? What's the matter with everybody giving their fair share and everybody having a fair shot? That sort of soaring hope and change rhetoric is very appealing for young people. The notion of redistribution to young people is appealing. They think, well, why should somebody have more than anybody else? And yet, if we look at economic realities, we know how devastating it is to an economy, to an individual, when the government comes in and says that it will forcibly take away from an individual that which it rightfully earned through hard work. It's the whole leftist notion that there is a limited pie, that those are our resources, and they have to fight and scramble in order to get their piece of the pie. Conservatives, on the other hand, believe that there's no limit to what sort of prosperity we can achieve as a nation if the government would get out of the way. But you look at the economic realities that these young people are facing right now, and you will see that this president has done nothing to champion their interests. In fact, he has just undermined them. And you're seeing them wake up to this reality when 50% of our young people who graduated last year from college either cannot find a job or can't find one that suits their qualifications. They are incredibly disillusioned. This is the first generation of young people who believe their future will be less prosperous than their parents. And that's in part from the economic realities that they're facing, skyrocketing unemployment, particularly for them, incredibly burdensome high student loans, debt that they're having to deal with no jobs to be able to pay it back. But also the constant bombardment that the whole notion of success, of ambition has been under from the president. It's taking away that individual initiative, that ambition, suggesting again, as he does with the middle class, as he does repeatedly with women, he does this as well with young people, suggesting that individuals are not strong enough, they're not smart enough, they're not ambitious enough to achieve success on their own. They need the government to come in and to support them and to provide them with handouts and goodies. That is completely antithetical to the American dream. So I think the most egregious thing that I believe that Obama has done during this administration, one of the most, there's so many to pick from, but one of the most pernicious and the one that we're going to have to deal with for generations to come is undermining what we are as Americans, undermining, of course, that notion of the American dream, but also what our democracy is all about. Young people really do feel like there are certain things that are, certain topics that are off limits, that you can't criticize Barack Obama because you'll be called a racist. And maybe they think they are racist. I mean, it's so deeply ingrained in them, the notion that we just shouldn't talk about some things. Criticizing Sandra Fluke, which I've done many times on college campuses, because it is astounding to me that this woman sat there and talked about needing $3,000 worth of contraception a year. I was shocked that we're not having this immediate conversation about that, about the dependency of government, but about women thinking that their behavior needs to be subsidized by the government. I would say that on college campuses, and a hush and shocked looks would fall over the audience that you're not allowed to say that. You're just not allowed to. So he's really going after the notion that we are vibrant discord when it's based on ideas and that respect that we as Americans intuitively have for one another. He's going after that whole notion, and I think in the process undermining democracy.
So you've spent a lot of time with young people, particularly when you worked at the Young America's Foundation. How then do you recommend that we get young people involved in the political process? There may be parents or grandparents tuned in today who are wondering how they can get their grandkids or their children involved in the political process and to care about some of the issues that are being talked about. What are your recommendations?
Well, the first thing I would say echoes what Ronald Reagan said in his farewell address when he said, young people, if your parents are not talking to you about what they believe and about what's happening in our society, nail them on it. At the dinner table tonight, nail them on it. And he actually said that. Our great dignified President Reagan said nail them on it. And young people need to do that. Parents sometimes assume that their children will just have their same values because they live in the same household and they hear what they say. I urge parents all the time, sit down and watch the news with your child. Talk to them about what's happening. Give them both sides of the argument, but absolutely don't be afraid to teach them what you believe, because they are going to be bombarded, particularly in schools, but also from the media, from Hollywood, everywhere they look, to books, with the leftist perspective. And you have to give them a steel of spine, but also the intellectual ability to challenge these ideas. I literally do it with my children every day, and it is an uphill battle. They come home with these ridiculous stories from their public schools about what sort of drivel and anti-American nonsense they've been fed, and every day it's something that we have to counter. So first of all, don't assume that your children are going to be conservative just by osmosis. If anything, they're going to be liberal by osmosis because there's so many more forces out there. Then get them involved with a young conservative group. You really do have to be courageous to be a conservative today at any level of schooling, but particularly in high school and college, because the attacks are ferocious, particularly from professors, from teachers. So young people need the support of a conservative network. So I would strongly suggest getting your children involved with Young America's Foundation, the Leadership Institute, Intercollegiate Studies Institute, Fund for American Studies. There are so many wonderful organizations out there. They have conferences, College Republicans. They have conferences where they teach students the skills that they need to be able to articulate their ideas. But more importantly than that, it gives young people courage by having that camaraderie. I'm not the only person on the face of the earth that thinks this. I can go out there and champion what I believe in, but they absolutely need that network. And then give them books. Give them ideas. Don't give them, some book that they're never going to read. I love The Conservative Mind by Russell Kirk, but don't give that to them to start off with. Give them something that a lot of young people say that they came to conservatism by reading books by Mark Levin or Sean Hannity or Rush Limbaugh. Give them The Divider in Chief. Give them these books that are meant to reach young people, to introduce them to conservative ideas, and then they'll go and they'll dig deeper and they'll want to know more.
Well, thank you. That was good advice. We can't end the webinar without talking about women and the perceived war on women, right?
Right.
And there's been so much messaging in this campaign specifically aimed at women. What have been some of those issues, and what is this imagined war on women?
Yeah, it's such a shocking subject, and we really, really need to talk about it because conservatives need to stand up and nail the left on this every single time that it comes up, because it's such an offense to who we are, partly as women, but who we are as Americans, and how we conservatives respect people based on their ideas, and we don't try to pit people against each other because of their gender or their race or any such things. And yet the Democrats have taken the issue of women and they have tried to distort it and create this mythological war on women in order to scare people into voting for Democrats, partly Barack Obama, but anybody. It really kicked into high gear. This has been happening throughout the past 4 years, where Republicans are being painted as anti-woman. But of course, with the Health and Human Services mandate that would compel religious organizations to provide health insurance that is contrary to their religious belief, the notion that we would compel the Catholic Church to provide birth control, coverage for birth control, it goes completely against our notion of religious freedom. And yet when Republicans articulated that need to protect our First Amendment rights, it was as though we handed them a gift, handed the left a gift. And they said, aha, I told you, they hate birth control. They want to take women back to the 1950s. They want to drag women out of abortion clinics. It has been stunning the way that issue has been perverted. Republicans have never said anything about having some problem with birth control. Yes, of course they have problems with abortion. They think that it should be, by and large, in particular Mitt Romney thinks it's an issue that should be handed back to the states to decide. But instead, the Democrats have started this rhetoric of a war on women. They call it an assault on women. And then they degrade women even farther by these ridiculous issues that they create and fabricate. The binder full of women, when Romney talked about reaching out and trying to find women to fill his cabinet. Isn't that bizarre that was offensive to the women's movement? I mean, who wouldn't want him? And in fact, to be reaching out to women. In fact, at one point, Romney had more women in his cabinet than any other governor in the country, and yet somehow he hates women. I think the Life of Julia website was incredibly insulting to women. Note, it was not the life of Bob, it was the life of Julia, suggesting that women are so pathetic that we must have the beneficent hand of government reaching down to lift us up from cradle to grave. Again and again, we've seen this administration condescend towards women. Stephanie Cutter, Obama's deputy campaign manager, said women don't care what's happened over the past 4 years. of course women care would have happened. The Democrats want to think that because they want to think that women aren't going to be motivated by concern over the economy or jobs, but of course they are, particularly given that women are suffering disproportionately under the great champion of women, Barack Obama. They're not gaining jobs back at the rate that men are. More women are in poverty than have been there in 17 years. 40%, this is a stagger, I won't give you too many statistics because my eyes glaze over too, but of women who are leading single parent households, 40% of them are in poverty. That is as a single mom myself, that is a staggering number to think that my sisters it's a tough place, and this is an opportunity for conservatives and Republicans to reach out and say, hey, that is exactly what we are opposed to. We want to provide opportunities for women to succeed. And the final example of, I think, the condescension, and it's really rather off color, and I'm sorry to even say it, but I'm going to because we need to know about it, on Obama's website when he posted a cartoon that said, vote like your lady parts depend on it. And I think the comeback to that is what Dana Loesch, a great radio talk show host, said when she said, I'll vote like one of my lady parts tells me to. We conservatives call it a brain. And that should be repeated again and again, that conservatives respect women. There is a war on women. There's an economic war on women by this administration, by undermining their job prospects, by undermining small businesses, which more and more women are starting. But there's also a real war on women that's happening internationally. And this president completely ignores the fact that women are suffering under totalitarian and Islamic regimes as he tries to promote the notion that we need abortion on demand internationally. That's his big goal. And yet women in the Middle East under these regimes that support Sharia law cannot set foot outside their front door without a male chaperone. And yet this president says nothing about it. I haven't heard him say anything about that precious girl in Pakistan who was targeted by the Taliban. They sent out a mob, and this mob got on her bus and shot her in the head because she had the audacity to want to go to school and to want to encourage other girls to go to school. And yet I heard last night for one of the first times ever in the foreign policy debate, I heard the president talk about the need to promote the rights of women around the world, but I found it incredibly hollow when he has suggested that Republicans in America are assaulting the rights on women, and yet he hasn't even had the moral fortitude to go after the real assaults on women that are happening in the name of Islam.
I'm glad you brought that up because actually, while you were talking, a citizen did email in and wanted to hear about just that topic. So. Now you said Obama sounded hollow when he talked about that issue.
Oh, yeah.
A related question that a citizen has submitted wants to know, where did Obama learn his speech pattern? It is so rhythmic and truly seems to draw the uneducated electorate.
That's interesting. I don't know where he learned it. I can imagine that sitting in Jeremiah Wright's church for as long as he did, that he probably acquired some of it there. It's very subtle how he attacks others, how nasty and mean he can be. It wasn't subtle last night. I thought that he was petty and small-minded last night as he attacked Mitt Romney, and I was thrilled that Mitt Romney said, attacking me is not an agenda, because that is what Obama's done for 4 years, attacking conservatives in order to distract from his agenda. But it is an incredibly effective speech pattern. You see that it falls apart when he doesn't have the teleprompter sitting right there, and that it's very manufactured, it is hollow, and you don't hear a lot of the hope and change rhetoric anymore. I think as a result of the fact that he has completely abandoned it, and he knows that he basically has been found out. He's that it is so shallow. But I'm so glad that somebody asked about the hollowness when it relates to supporting the rights of women around the world. It is as though Obama feels the need, he feels compelled to prop up these ruthless dictators, even in their emerging states. In Egypt, we are the ruling power in Egypt, run by the Muslim Brotherhood, the political party is controlled by the Muslim Brotherhood. They are now admitting what we knew all along when Obama's administration met with the Muslim Brotherhood in the White House, that Sharia law, which is the subjugation of women and anybody who's not Muslim, is their number one goal. We've known that all along. They've lied about it, but Obama doesn't counter them on that. He doesn't counter the rising tide of the Taliban and other extremist groups in Afghanistan or in Iraq, where children in Afghanistan, little girls are having acid thrown at them. Women political leaders are being murdered, they're being shot, and yet President Obama, using the bully pulpit that he has, supposedly supporting the rights of women, he says nothing.
Thank you. You've certainly given, I think, women who are watching a lot to think about. One more question, and then we're going to end it. We're a little bit over time here, but I thought this was a good one. This is from a citizen.
Great.
Thanks for emailing. The lack of transparency with this administration is frightening. Are there a few examples that we can share with our undecided friends?
Well, in so many areas, this administration has been non-transparent, opaque. And the best one that you can talk about is Obamacare, and the fact that we were promised that during the health care proceedings, during the discussions, the committee meetings, we would have C-SPAN coverage. Do you remember that? It was absolutely a promise of this president that we would know what was happening from beginning to end, and yet we knew nothing. Nancy Pelosi's infamous statement of we have to pass it in order to know what's in it, in part because nobody was allowed in on the proceedings, and then it was literally just rammed down our throats. The appointment of these unelected czars, that has been completely behind the scenes, but I think one of the best examples of the lack of transparency would be how Obama is implementing fundamental change through regulations. We know none of this. He said before he was elected that fundamental change comes not through the legislative branch or the judicial branch, it comes administratively. That meant that promise he made right before he was inaugurated, we're about to fundamentally transform the United States of America, was going to be based on regulatory changes. You and I have no idea what those regulatory changes are. They are buried in thousands of pages that literally rob us of our freedom, a freedom that only we can willingly give away. Otherwise, God gave us that freedom, and we are the ones to whom it has been entrusted, and only we give it away. But Obama has decided that he can trump us on that he can decide, based on that liberal elitism, when we need our freedoms taken away through regulatory reform. And through that regulatory reform, he's hiking up electricity prices, hiking up energy prices, and redistributing that income in a very deceitful way. So I would say the regulatory changes that we are only beginning to see, I promise you, we'll see them after the election. That is one of the ways that this president has abandoned his promise to be transparent.
Well, Kate, thank you so much. We've learned so much about political tactics and messaging today. I hope you all will go and purchase a copy of Kate's book, or maybe buy one for a friend. Again, Divider in Chief, The Fraud of Hope and Change. You can pick that up on her website, www.kateobenshain.com. Thanks, everyone. That's all the time we have for today. I hope you'll join us tomorrow. We have John Fund coming in to talk about exposing voter fraud and how to maintain election integrity in our country. Thanks, everyone.